Have you found the yellow sign? In my continuing review of weird fantasy stories, we come to one of the weirdest of all, and that's 1895's The King in Yellow by American writer Robert W. Chambers, who was a definite influence on H.P. Lovecraft. And this book is not a novel. It's a book of short stories, 9 short stories. Some of them are romantic. There's also a section of poetry. But the first 4 relate to our supernatural horror and almost cosmic horror. And they deal with a play called The King in Yellow, which apparently it was banned, and if you read it, you'll go mad. You can read the first, it's a play in 2 chapters. You read the first chapter, you're okay, but if you can't read the second one, or else you'll go mad, or if you see it performed, you'll go mad. And apparently, although it was banned and forbidden, almost everybody in this, the first 4 stories, seems to have a copy in their library. And in one case, the guy says he swore he didn't buy it, and he wasn't going to buy it, and somehow it shows up in his library anyway, which is very frightening. And a very classic story. Lin Carter called it, quote unquote, an absolute masterpiece, probably the single greatest book of weird fantasy written in this country between the death of Poe and the rise of Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft himself said he was influenced by this book, though he only really makes one overt reference to it. And that's basically a mention of a character called Hastur, who's a dark god in these stories, but wasn't when he began, and I'll explain that in a moment, in The Whisperer in Darkness. But he does refer to things like the yellow sign, which is some sort of strange sign that relates to this character, the King in Yellow. All we know about the play is that there are 3 characters, 2 females and 1 male. The females are Casilda and Camilla, and the other character is called the Stranger, and that's all we know. We don't. The play itself does not mention a character called the King in Yellow, but Chambers does in the stories. Like I said, it's 9 stories. The first one is called The Repairer of Reputations, which has to do with a guy named Hildred Castaigne, who believes that he is descended from the King in Yellow. It takes place in a futuristic America of the 1920s, where there's been a war between America and Germany over the island of Samoa, of all things. America won. And so now Manhattan has become sort of like a military fort, and there's all these military people in there, including Hildred Castaigne's cousin Louis, who he is very jealous of because Louis is engaged to the daughter of an armorer who Castaigne goes and sees often because he likes him. He repairs old, broken armor, and he's sort of smitten with his daughter, but his daughter is engaged to his cousin Louis, and that sort of makes him angry. And also, he believes that based on this book that's held in the possession of his friend Mr. Wilde, who claims that he's actually a repairer of reputations. That's what he does. He repairs people's reputations for a living, and claims he has like hundreds of people working for him to do this, but he has never shown any proof that he actually does it. So most people think he's crazy, which he probably is. That he himself is descended from the King in Yellow. Let me read you a little bit of the prose, because I just think it's well written. For I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, when the twin suns sink into the lake of Holly, and my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. The pallid mask also refers to the King in Yellow. He says that the play, spread like an infectious disease from city to city, continent to continent. Also, there's a thing in 1920, apparently suicide was legalized, and they put in these, what they call lethal chambers in all these cities, including New York, and there's one in Washington Square where the character lives. And again, Chambers gives some really interesting and in-depth. I used to hang out in Washington Square quite a lot when I lived in New Jersey, so I know the references that he's making here, and he's quite familiar with all the things in Washington Square, like the Garibaldi statue and the Arch and the various things in the park that he describes properly. Even for 1895, they didn't change that much till my time. The The ninth story, the second story is called The Mask, which is about anyway, this character, Hildred Castaigne, basically slowly goes mad, and he begins thinking that people are conspiring. His cousin is conspiring against him because he becomes engaged to marry this girl, and he's convinced that he has to stop him, and he says that he hired somebody to kill him. Well, that's all untrue, and he actually dies in a mental hospital. In the ending, they say that he died in a mental hospital. So he was quite literally driven. The first term we know is driven insane by the King in Yellow. The second story, excuse me, is called The Mask. And in The Mask, this is very interesting. There's a kind of a strange experiment that's done by this scientist and artist, that he can turn things into any living thing into marble by immersing it in this liquid. At first, the liquid turns sort of bubbles and it turns sort of a gold color. And a golden ray shines on it, and then whatever object he puts in there turns into marble. But you can still see sort of like the colors inside the marble, that it's still sort of alive. Like he puts a lily into it, and you see that there's still like a reddish glow in the lily. Well, he wants to try this. His name is Boris Yvain, and he's a famous sculptor. And he has this very beautiful model called Geneviève, who is 18 and apparently, absolutely gorgeous. And he and his friend are both sort of smitten with this girl. And Boris wants to try this liquid that he's invented on living things, though his friend sort of, I think his name is Scott, objects to it, and Alec objects to it and says that he shouldn't do it. But he does this with a rabbit, and he has the same result. He does it with some goldfish. He's got a bathtub full of this solution in his apartment in Paris, and is trying to figure out what to do with this stuff, because he realizes if he can't use it sell it commercially, because it would ruin sculptures, forever. You didn't have to do a sculpture. You could just dip something into this and it became a sculpture. So he wants to be very judicious about what he does with it. But eventually, as happens in these two, it mentions that there's a copy of The King in Yellow on his bookshelf. And his friend is bored, and one day he finds the book and he starts reading it. And it mentions again The King in Yellow, the Palette Mask, the Lake of Holly, the Towers of Carcosa. I should mention where those words Carcosa and Holly come from. Those are references to two stories written by Ambrose Bierce. The first is called An Inhabitant of Carcosa, wherein a character is lost in some sort of a cemetery, and he's walking around. He can't figure out where he is or how he got there, and he claims he's from an ancient city called Carcosa. And in the end, it turns out that he's actually a ghost, apparently a very old Arabic ghost from centuries ago. And the other reference to Holly. Holly is a character in An Inhabitant of Carcosa, who the character has a conversation with. He's a philosopher, not a place. In the King in Yellow, it's a Lake Holly, or Lake of Holly. And also Hastur is mentioned. Hastur is a gentle god of shepherds in Bierce's other story, Haiti the Shepherd. But in The King in Yellow, Hastur is referenced as something evil or frightening. Mentions several other kind of central themes. The Hyades, Aldebaran, which are both in the constellation of Taurus. The Hyades are a group of 100 stars that make up the head of the bull. Aldebaran is his shoulder, a bright orange-red supergiant. And mentions the moon, the Hyades, black stars, the Towers of Carcosa. Let me read you the intro poem to the Pair of Reputations, because that explains. I'll go on about the different stories. In The Mask, again, like I said, all these things turn to marble. Eventually, as happens in these stories, there's a tragedy. After the main character reads The King in Yellow, of course, this happens. Geneviève falls into the bathtub full of this preserving fluid, and she becomes a statue. And Boris is so upset that he shoots himself in the head, kills himself. Alec can't bring himself to destroy the statue because he was so in love with Geneviève, and eventually the house is sold. Everything is left to him, and he sells the house, but he can't destroy the statues, or one of the Madonna, which had Genevieve's face as a inspiration. And oddly, for a supernatural story, there's actually a happy ending. Suddenly, these things that Boris had dipped into this solution start coming back to life. The lily comes back to life. The rabbit comes back to life, starts running around the house, and the maid saying, "Where did that rabbit come from?" The goldfish come back to life, and of course, in the end, Genevieve opens up her eyes and smiles. She's come back to life as well. So a rare horror story with a happy ending. The next does not have a happy ending. It's very frightening. It's called In the Court of the Dragon. This too takes place in Paris. And this man is pursued by this really creepy, like, organist from the church who is just, a very terrifying character who keeps following him. The main character, he won't leave him alone. And he's trying to, run away and from this character, and he just can't get away. And I won't ruin the ending of that for you, because I think you should read it yourself. Then, of course, comes The Yellow Sign, which is the most frightening and well-written, I should say, of all of the 4 supernatural stories in the book. The Yellow Sign is about a man who sees a very creepy kind of church watchman. And again, the watchman seems to be following him. He looks like a corpse. He has very pale features and is very thin and kind of wormy looking. And one of the characters actually touches him and says it repelled him, like he received a shock, like he had touched a corpse. And also that his finger sunk into the guy, and he just got horrified. He said he gave the impression of a quote unquote plump grave worm, and that the touch was so noisy and intense. And this is a tough guy friend of his that's saying this. He was he wanted to beat him up, and he was so sickened that he ran away, and he refused to talk about it again. And then there's an artist who's trying to paint this beautiful girl named Tessie, and he's making this painting, and after he sees this guy, he just ruins his painting. He paints this as a horrible green color, and he can't get rid of that green, even using turpentine to get it off the canvas. It won't come off. He has to destroy the canvas and start all over on a new canvas. And Tessie is telling him, meanwhile, that she had this terrible dream about a hearse, horse-drawn hearse, and in this hearse was a coffin, and in the coffin was him. And he says, "But that's ridiculous. I'm not, dead. I'm right here, and you just had a bad dream." And she says, "I don't think it was a dream." And he says, "That creepy man, the man below in the churchyard?" And he says, "Yeah, what about it?" He says, "He's the one who drove the hearse in my dream." He says, "Oh, now you're just being ridiculous, silly." And then his friend says that he when he was having this confrontation, he says he kept looking at him evilly, so he wanted to confront him. And he grabbed him, and his finger actually physically came off in his hand, and then he just freaked out and ran away. And he noticed when he looked that his friend told him that when the artist looks down, he sees that the middle finger of the left hand of this guy is missing, as would have happened if the story he was being told was true and it wasn't an exaggeration. Which is kind of scary in and of itself. The next couple of stories are not horror or supernatural. The Demoiselle d'Is is a sort of an interesting time travel love story about a man who is, again, lost somewhere in France, and he is looking for a specific town, finds this woman who's a falconer, and has this grand castle, and he goes to, be with her and learn about falconry. He falls in love with her very, very quickly, and then something happens, and he is returned to the future, and he finds that there's a grave that says, that this woman died of a broken heart from a guy named Philip, which was him, in the year in 1839, and that's 100 years before he lived, so that can't really have happened. But that's sort of an interesting story also. The Prophets of Paradise is just a series of poems, and a couple of them do refer to events in The King in Yellow, but it doesn't make any direct references except it has a quotation from the play that opens it. The Street of the Four Winds is another interesting tale. It's about a man who finds a cat that belonged to his neighbor in his apartment and doesn't understand why it keeps coming to him. And he goes to the apartment of the woman who owns it and finds out that she has died. And that's kind of a tragic thing. The next story in the Street of the First Shell is a war story set during the Siege of Paris of 1870 to 1871. Kind of long, kind of drawn out, and I thought it was kind of a bit boring, really. The Street of Our Lady of the Fields is a romantic story about Americans in Paris, as is the last story of Rue Barré, which has a little bit of a strange ending that makes some references to this play, The King in Yellow. Let me read you the opening sonnet, which is from Casilda's song, which comes from Act 1, Scene 2 of the play The King in Yellow. Along the shore the cloud waves break, the twin suns sink behind the lake, the shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise and strange moons circle through the skies, but stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the tatters of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou, unsung, as tears unshed shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. And that's great. Again, that's a reference to that story by Ambrose Bierce, an inhabitant of Carcosa, but much stranger. And there are references throughout the work to this. I'm not going to, again, spoil it by telling you everything about it. But again, remember that phrase, have you found the yellow sign? That keeps coming up. You'll also find that in season 1 of True Detective with the HBO series with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey, which is really quite good. Doesn't really have a lot to do with The King in Yellow, but it does have some references and the references to some of the things that are mentioned by Chambers in this. Chambers was not actually known for writing supernatural or horror stories. He was known for writing romantic fiction, historical fiction. And someone said that, it's too bad that his characters were sort of flat because he had a very good voice for the time period and the dress and the style, but that his characters just were not that interesting. So oddly, I guess the thing that he's most known for is this collection of 9 stories, The King in Yellow. So go and read it. I recommend it again because it's from 1895. It's in public domain. You can read it for free.